around to the top near the 5, and Taylor McHargue, ESPN College Football Analyst, broadcaster, joins us on 365 Sports. We'll get to the game at Temple and USF here in a moment, but let's start with the college football standings release. Taylor, what was to you maybe one or two storylines that you saw that jumped out at you?
Well, I think the ESPN knew what they were doing, putting LSU at 10, create a top 10 matchup for Alabama. In all seriousness, I thought LSU at 10 surprised me quite a bit, and it did create some drama for week one. That was one of the teams that I was surprised to see where they were initially. Clemson at 4, the resume is not awful. The biggest thing that jumps out is still that they've got legitimate issues at quarterback. And I think there were a couple teams behind them that you could have made a solid case that deserved to be ahead of them, one of them being TCU. I think there's a couple things working against TCU right now. Number one, the worthless preseason poll. And number two, I do think, right or wrong, it is being held against them that some of their wins have been comeback wins when the starting quarterbacks for these teams have gone down. Whether or not that's being acknowledged by the committee, I think it is playing a part. The good news for TCU is they keep playing and keep winning. If they were to run the table in the Big 12, they're going to be in.
Let me ask you this. So, Taylor, would that be discussed if it was a blue blood name?
No, certainly not. Think about if it was Oklahoma or Texas, they are at a minimum, they're 5 with the resume that TCU has. They're probably ahead of Clemson, to be honest, because Michigan's being penalized because of their non-conference schedule. It's one of the worst in the history of the playoff era. It may be the weakest non-conference schedule. So they're being penalized for that. And Clemson have a couple quality wins, but I think they're at 4 because of the issues with quarterback play and having to come back late against a Syracuse team that turned around and got beat at home by Notre Dame. So, to your point, though, no, absolutely not. If this wasn't TCU with a first-year head coach and a team that was picked middle of the pack in the Big 12, they would not be at 7.
Taylor, this week, the biggest game is Tennessee and Georgia. We just made our picks. Smokey picked Georgia. Craig and I both picked Tennessee. And the biggest reason I can come up for Tennessee is, other than the way they've been playing all year, they feel like a bit of a team of destiny for me, but that would be winning between the hedges. What are your thoughts on that game?
Yeah, they do kind of feel like LSU in 2019, don't they? Where it's all season, you're sort of waiting around. It's kind of a nice story. Okay, is this team legit? And then I think it was Alabama in week 9 or 10, kind of a similar spot in the season, that they went and got a win, and everybody said, okay, maybe we need to actually pay attention and give some credit here to that LSU team. I think it's similar for Tennessee. Georgia's going to try and make this game ugly. I think if this turns into a shootout, that lends itself well to Tennessee because I think they've got the firepower on offense to really play with anybody. On the defensive side, it's been hit or miss. Will be interesting to see what does Tennessee do with the tight end position for Georgia. I think that's going to be something to pay attention to in this game. I like Tennessee to win this game. I think they've got the type of offense that travels well because a lot of it's Hendon Hooker's not dropping back. A lot of this isn't 5-step progressions. A lot of it's getting out of his hands quick. That'll limit pass rush for Georgia. So I like Tennessee. I like them throughout the rest of this season. I think they're neutral site or on the road. You can put them up against really anybody, and I would take them right now.
All right, let's stick with the SEC here, Taylor. Top 10 matchup. I don't know how many people thought this would be a top 10 matchup even a couple of weeks ago, but LSU at number 10 now, playing host to number 6 Alabama. Pretty huge game here, and usually a good one between these two. What are your thoughts?
Well, the last time we saw LSU at home against the top 10 team, they got their doors blown off by Tennessee. Now, I think you fast forward a couple of weeks, and the way that they came back against Ole Miss was impressive, where they're down, I believe it was 20-3, and they go on a 42-3 run, I think is what it was, and figured some things out on the offensive side. You're not going to be able to give Alabama a spot like they did to Ole Miss. But, look, you guys know as well as anybody, going on the road, playing a night game in Baton Rouge, it's a tough place to play. They're going to have this, as Brian Kelly's talked all week about how this is the type of game and the situation for why he left South Bend to go be the head coach at LSU. So ultimately, it comes down to one guy, and it's the quarterback, your Heisman Trophy winning quarterback on the other side for Alabama. Can they slow down Bryce? If they can't, look, this may be a 2-score win for Alabama, but think back, and I know one of the games he didn't play in for A&M when it came down to a one-possession game late, but even earlier in the year on the road against Texas, I mean, this is an Alabama team that could have 3 losses. So I don't think it's certainly not out of the question that LSU could win this game. But if Alabama plays clean on offense, I think they probably win even on the road.
I was just thinking, you got to love the transfer portal. After talking about the 2 games we're talking about, all made possible by the transfer portal, Taylor.
That's exactly right. I mean, look, I cover most games for the American Athletic Conference, right? And every week it's kind of a mixed bag between you've got schools that have an established culture and they only hit the portal for 1 or 2 guys. And then you've got, when staff turn over and things change, you've got South Florida again this week. Like half of their roster from year over year is basically brand new. And that's just the day and age we live in. And for some schools, it's worked out and they've hit, especially at the highest level, like a USC. Sometimes it doesn't, though. Sometimes you get kids in and it doesn't pan out early in the season, and all of a sudden they start looking around again. So it's we used to say, it wasn't even that long ago. I sound like an old timer, but we used to say transfer for a reason. I don't really think that's the case anymore for most positions. But for some kids, if you transfer and it doesn't pan out, all of a sudden they start looking around midway through the season like, okay, maybe I'm not going to stick it out here.
Taylor, a team that may not be a part of the first 5 to 7 in the college football standings that, because of who they still have to play, can get back in this thing?
They're outside of the top 7, but I think the best chance for the Pac-12 to get a team in the playoff would be for USC to run the table, because I think Oregon is going to have that week 1 loss against Georgia held over their head all year. And even if they were to run the table the rest of the way, win the Pac-12, everybody else, the national media, I think there is some truth to a natural SEC bias. I mean, you've seen that with some of the rankings with LSU at 10 and Ole Miss at 11. But for the Pac-12, I think their hope of getting somebody in, you could point back to it's a close loss, a night game at Utah for USC. If they close out the year on a run, they would have to beat UCLA. Then you'd have to likely beat Oregon in the Pac-12 championship. I think there's a path there for them to get in. And certainly over if you have a 1-loss Big 12 team, I think this is what would be interesting. If there's a scenario where you're talking about 1-loss ACC, 1-loss Pac-12, or 1-loss Big 12, that's where it gets really interesting on who the committee puts in. I think USC would have a pretty strong case, especially depending on what their performances look like the rest of the way.
Taylor, one of the more difficult games to put your finger on in the Big 12 this week has to be Kansas and Oklahoma State, given Oklahoma State's mash unit of a team. Kansas off the bye, maybe with Jalen Daniels, maybe not. This might be a battle of the backups and Jason Bean and Gunnar Gundy. What do you make of what's going to happen in Lawrence on Saturday?
Yeah, I mean, the Oklahoma State loss last week was one of the more shocking results. It doesn't surprise me that Kansas State won that game, and it wouldn't have surprised me if they'd won in a traditional blowout fashion. Call it 3 or 4 touchdowns, but 48-0, one of the worst losses in program history. I don't think anybody saw that coming. It's a battle of backups, and both backup QBs are in Kansas and Oklahoma State. I think that lends itself more to Oklahoma State. I think there's still too much top-down talent. For Kansas, it was really everything changed when Jaden Daniels got hurt early in the year, where they start out 5-0, and now they've dropped 3 in a row: TCU, OU, and Baylor. So they're still trying to fight to get one more just to get to bowl eligibility. But again, if you have both backups in, I think that lends itself to Oklahoma State. The other one in the Big 12 that I have circled just because pure entertainment from the offseason is Tech going to TCU and everything that went into the tickets, and TCU withholding tickets from the Tech fans, and that's how it was the birth of the cactus emoji this offseason. So Tech, this is an opportunity for them to play spoiler, and again, just for pure entertainment value alone, I think this game is worth watching in that 11 o'clock slate.
You know your Big 12 football because not a lot of people even know where that came from, and that's exactly where it came from, was the TCU Tech ticket fiasco. Yeah, that whole thing, and I'd expect that to that's like a rivalry now. I mean, it already kind of was, but it's even more so now just because of the whole ticket fiasco. So that is going to be interesting. I think you're right. So the last time that the Rice Owls were in a bowl game was back when some guy named Taylor McHargue was on the roster, and they won a couple of conference championships. They're first in a really long time in decades. And Taylor, last night, the Owls get another win. They're sitting there with 5 on the year. And I know looking at the rest of their schedule, there's not necessarily a gimme when you're looking at like UTSA and North Texas, and then there's Western Kentucky, even if they're not quite what they were last year. But how are you feeling about the Rice Owls?
Man, I won't bore your listeners too long with this because I know they don't. It's not what they tuned in to hear. But I am proud of them. I'm proud of my Owls for getting, they're 1 win away. Last week, lost to a Charlotte team that had just fired their head coach, and It was kind of a game that Rice had circled to say, look, if you win this one and go beat UTEP, you're in. Because the last 3 weeks, Western Kentucky, UTSA, and North Texas, those are the top 3 teams in the league in Conference USA. So you got to get one of those. They're capable. The problem for Rice right now is they don't have any quarterback depth, and I think what that's created is quarterback TJ McMahon is slinging the ball all over the yard, and I think he leads the country in interceptions. If he's not, he's in the top 2 or 3. I think he's got 12 on the year now through 9 games. So he turns it over quite a bit, and I think a lot of that's just he knows they're not going to bench him. The other quarterback is hurt behind him, and then they've got a freshman that they don't want to play. So that's been the biggest Achilles heel. And if they take care of the football, they can go get a win against any one of the 3 teams they have remaining. But turnovers they had another 2 last night against UTEP. But look, I don't care. This is a true story, guys. We went and rush ordered a passport for my 5-month-old just in case Rice goes to the Bahamas Bowl so that we can go.
There you go.
We don't get too many. We don't get too many bowl appearances on South Main, but wherever they go, we'll be in attendance.
Have they debated at all if, like, break glass in case of emergency Luke McCaffrey, or is he just too good where he is now?
He has been that's honestly one of the biggest reasons why Rice has had some success this year is Brad Rosner and Luke McCaffrey are the 2 best skill players Rice has had, kind of a 1-2 punch, honestly, since Jordan Taylor was there back in the day. He had a 5 or 6 year NFL career. I mean, these guys are that level of talent, and especially McCaffrey. He went from quarterback to playing receiver, and anybody that's watched any of their games or watched their tape, he runs, moves around like a receiver and drops right into it. Like, that is really difficult to do because it's a totally different skill set. And most quarterbacks that convert, it takes them a while. But he was doing all the little things, the route running, the settling in zone coverage, like all the little things that are hard to teach. He was doing it immediately. And I think that's, honestly, it's probably a lot to do with just bloodline and who is, the family that he came from.
What does this mean for Mike Bloomgren long-term for them?
Yeah, look, the rumor around Rice and the kind of the chatter has been he probably needs to get to a bowl this year. And I love Mike. He's been nothing but great to me. But 5 years in a place like Conference USA, you have to get to a bowl. And I think that's kind of the consensus with everybody. It will be interesting to see these last 3, what they look like. Rice is not the type of place to do big buyouts and fire coaches. And I think, that's obvious. But I think the expectation for him is they need to get to a bowl. With this being his 5th year and the amount of production that they had coming back, they really should have already been to 6 wins to this point, but still has 3 more to go, and hopefully they get at least one of those.
Taylor, love it. Thank you. Enjoy your game.